Chapter 1 of Faithful Presence is called God's Faithful Presence. And presence is how God works. This is what he does. And in God's presence, there is forgiveness, reconciliation, healing, transformation, patience, and best of all, love. And being a people present to God and inviting the world to join in God's presence is God's plan. And the church today, he calls for a new faithfulness. So there's a summary that he gives of all of Scripture showing this is how God works from creation, all through Israel, in Christ preeminently, and then also into the future, a new heaven and new earth. However, again, like I alluded to in the intro, maybe there's not always this constant forgiveness, reconciliation, healing, transformation, patience, love. And so Dave would say here that there is this missing out of God's presence, especially in the West, even for Christians. The notion that we can be present to God and He to us is not even on the horizon of our awareness, that we don't imagine that God is present outside of us or between us, or that He even could confront us in the middle of our worlds if we open ourselves to Him. He tells a short story about people being distracted in church, even at the communion table, people just being distracted and not present and not aware of one another, let alone of the reality of Christ. And here's another quote too. Daily we obsess about holding our lives together. We walk in isolation and protection from each other. We walk past homeless people on the street and give $1, but we don't know them and we don't even dare to know them. At work, we look at clients as lost profit statements. Even our most intimate relationships can turn into negotiated contracts. As a result, there is a distrustful distance between people in all types of relationships. We are empty and longing for some kind, any kind of presence. So again, the idea is that God works through His presence. He tells a story about a neighborhood called Lawndale and the laundromat there, saying that God's presence is not always obvious and that He requires witnesses, that God comes humbly in Christ and He so loves us and He never imposes Himself on us. And this is where the renewing of all things can come from. So kingdom and presence is also core to the idea here too, that Jesus comes to fulfill the idea of God's rule as God's presence among us, turning this notion of an upside down kingdom into reality. And this is where a gathered community submits itself to one another. And in this community, the church, where God's reign and rule takes visible shape. So the church as Christ's body and God's temple, where God uniquely dwells and makes His presence known. Justice, reconciliation, renewal, and healing. But where do we see this? What church looks like this? Do we as the Meeting House always look like justice, reconciliation, renewal, and healing? And the answer is sometimes, yes, there are glimmers of it when people and communities are transformed. But this is lost when the church aligns itself with worldly power, government, money, self-preservation, and keeping people happy. So how do we do this? More to come. Chapter 2.